David Smiley. Let's turn to our new governor in the state of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who right now is on a thank you tour of the state going around, which is fine. He and Jeanette Nunez, the lieutenant governor. But his administration is beginning to sort of take shape with his appointments, and maybe, it seems to me, one of his most controversial is Richard Corcoran, the former House Speaker, huge supporter of charter schools, to be the education commissioner. What do you think of that?
Well, you know, Richard Corcoran, part of why his pick has been so debated is his wife is involved with the charter school.
Yeah.
When he was Speaker of the House the last 2 years, he certainly pushed charter school legislation that was seen by critics to sort of go into the area of favoring charter schools over traditional district schools, which is where that conflict really comes into play. But if you look at is Richard Corcoran, how is he different from the current person in that position, Pam Stewart? You know, his push for charter schools isn't ideologically all that different. What's different is the style and his ability to have control of that office.
Yeah, he is a real tough guy, and I say that with some respect. He's very smart, and Rosemary, he got $140 million. I guess it was last year, for Schools of Hope, which are charter schools.
Right. Yes. No, he is going to be a huge disruptor in the public school sector, which has had a lot of disruption already. And if I could just make one other point, I think that the filling out of the governor's administration, that one of the more interesting choices is that of Shane Strom as his chief of staff. Shane was chief of staff for Governor Charlie Crist when he was a Republican. He knows how Tallahassee works, where the levers are. He's well respected. He knows the role of a chief of staff. What's interesting about it is that he most recently has worked for the South Broward Hospital District, a public hospital system in Broward that when Governor Scott's antipathy toward public hospitals is clear. Incoming House Speaker Jose Oliva has targeted hospitals in the crosshairs. That a public hospital system guy is going to be in the governor's office as chief of staff makes it all very interesting.
Boy, does it ever. It sets up a lot of conflict coming up here between Jose Oliva and Shane Strom and others. You know, we'll see where the governor comes out. All right, everybody hold your thoughts for a minute. We'll be right back.
You even won't be.
Oh my goodness, the conversation has been going on here during the break here. We're Rick Christie of the Palm Beach Post, David Smiley of the Miami Herald, Rosemary O'Hara of the Sun Sentinel. Rosemary, your page this week published, I thought, a really thoughtful, good editorial on Amendment 4, which was what, supported by nearly 70% of Florida voters in November, and it says people who were convicted of a crime, a felony, served their time, should get the right to vote, and come January 8th, ought to be able to walk in and register.
Right. They set a deadline of January 8th. So it's everybody felony, former prisoner, except if it's murder or sexual offenses. And yet under Governor Scott, his administration says, oh, well, we've got to toss this to the legislature. The language is very clear. If you did this, you should get your voting rights back. It doesn't need an act of the legislature, which has a history of taking constitutional amendments that are supported by the public. Medical marijuana, my gosh, we still haven't fully implemented that. How about that Amendment 1, was it? The environmental funding? We haven't implemented that.
The courts forced them really to spend the money,
Yes.
which they now take credit for.
Yeah, so tossing these things to the legislature is a huge quagmire and a stall tactic.
Yeah, David, the Herald reported, I think yesterday, that the state supervisors of election had a meeting, I believe, on Tuesday, and the Secretary of State met with them, and he said essentially, well, you all want to know how to implement Amendment 4, and let's get the legislature involved. So, as Rosemary says, the legislature is being invited into something that the ACLU, Howard Simon, says it's self-executing.
Yeah, I was at a gathering of the supervisors of elections in Sarasota, and they were all a bit flummoxed as to, wanting to move forward, knowing what the constitutional amendment says, and yet knowing that it seems pretty clear that the legislature and the cabinet are going to want some sort of implementing legislation, which doesn't seem to be needed. And there's a comment from one supervisor about, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. in terms of taking these applications that are going to start coming in for for people to vote, and knowing that the state probably is going to frown on the ability for them to do so, even though that's what the amendment says.
Yeah.
Well, I think the amendment, from what I've been able to find out anyway, the amendment was written specifically to avoid the legislature.
Right.
That's why the
didn't want
language,
anything to do with it.
right? Because the language, I mean, they even went as far as engaging John Mills, former Florida House Speaker, a former UF dean of the UF Law School, to write the language so that they did not have to go through this with the Florida legislature. And so now, what I think happens next is simple. One of these ex-felons who's been frustrated for years, trying to register to vote or waiting to get their voting rights restored before this ridiculous clemency process that we have, just goes and registers to vote. It's just that simple. During January 9th, one of these people goes to register to vote, and things get kicked up to the next level.
And you know, the other thing is that supervisors of elections are used to dealing with the databases of law enforcement. Right now, they have to check that database to see if the guy is if somebody is a felon.
Yes.
So okay, they go and register to vote. They swear they have done their time. They've served their, they're good to go. And then okay, supervisor, check the rolls and see if there are people on the roll or on the database that are not
It's
supposed
just
to be
that
voters.
simple. Yes.
Yeah. If we can, there is a corollary to Amendment 4 that I saw a story that I found personally very disturbing this week, and that was that the State Board of Executive Clemency, headed by the governor and 3 other cabinet members, they had a meeting. Of course, they've completely slowed down this process. In my view, they've subverted it. And the Groveland Four, who were 4 black men, 1949, arrested, charged, jailed, tortured for allegedly raping a white woman, and then it was shown that it was completely false, that they were innocent, but they died, they went to prison for it, and the Clemency Board, Rosemary, did nothing. They haven't, the legislature last year said unanimously, posthumously pardon these 4 men.
I can't remember the last time that the legislature was unanimous in a vote, and that they said, we did wrong, clear up this smudge, this black mark on our history, and that the cabinet refuses to bring it up. He's not out of office yet. He wants to stick around until the very last day. There's a chance for him to do the right thing.
Right, absolutely. And I believe 2 of the 4 are still alive, I believe. And I don't understand this either. Again, I kept trying to understand what the cabinet was trying to prove here, what the governor and the cabinet were trying to prove here by not doing this, but I really don't have any explanation for it.
There is none. And we should say their names: Charles Greenlee, Walter Irvin, Samuel Shepard, Ernest Thomas.
Yeah.
They deserve to be pardoned
Yes.
posthumously.